Well, we're looking for the small leak now. This is what really my main thing. I think this is the holy grail of this whole investigation. If we can find a small hole in Nord Stream 2, line A, but it's not so easy to find. We didn't see it on the boat-mounted sonar, so we have to send down the fish. That's what the guys are doing now. And what we want to see is really the primary impact of the explosives. And this site is the only site, I think, now where we have any hopes of seeing that, because all the other sites there has been this enormous outflow of gas, natural gas, that's just blown away all the mud and all the, all the traces there were of the original explosion.
This was Erik Andersson, a former Boing engineer and organizer of the so far only independent investigation into the Nord Stream attacks. Against all odds, he has not only set up a private expedition to the actual site of the attacks, but he brought with him a small team of experts to operate sonar equipment and a remotely operated underwater drone. What you see here is a 3D representation of the segment of the pipeline that he just mentioned, and in the interview you will see the full scale of the destruction. Since the topic of the Nord Stream attacks has almost completely disappeared from the news everywhere, you might be forgiven to think, so what? Yes, there was a bad event, but life goes on, right? Well, if you follow this channel, you know that already a year before Simon Hirsch's article was published on Substack, I had interviewed people like Noam Chomsky, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, or CIA analyst Roy McGovern, and more recently the former director of the Max Planck Institute, on the topic of the Nord Stream attacks, and all identified the US as the prime suspect in what can only be described as the largest attack on a nation's critical infrastructure since the Second World War. If you ask yourself who had the means, motives and opportunity for this attack, you might be interested in this short clip with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. One has to understand that the consequences of this geopolitically motivated event will be felt for generations to come, and that they will reverberate long after the men whose brainchild this atrocious act of state terrorism was have turned to dust. In my second interview with him, US Ambassador Charles Freeman spoke about the deindustrialization of Germany and the consequent effects that are already felt across Europe.
There is, of course, the principle of cui bono, who benefits. And the benefits are very clearly not just strategic alignment of Europe with the United States, but also an enormous increase in natural gas exports by the United States at very high prices to Europe.
And right after this interview with Erik was recorded, something interesting has happened. The company who owns the Nord Stream pipelines had submitted a court filing against the insurers of the pipelines in the British High Court because, not surprisingly, they refused to pay. In their defense, the British insurers Lloyd and Arch are arguing in a document that Erik had obtained that they have no obligation to honor their coverage of the Nord Stream pipelines because the unprecedented act of industrial sabotage was likely carried out by a national government. Now, why is this relevant? Well, it seems the contract entails an exception clause that would obligate the insurer to pay in case of a terror attack, but not if the attack was carried out by a government. Logically, this means Lloyd & Co. will do everything in their power to prove that the government was involved, because that's the only way they can escape the responsibility to pay. That's an interesting development indeed, and we will keep you informed via our Twitter channel. Okay, but before we now jump into the interview with Erik, a quick call to action. Some of the best interviews on this channel are shadow banned, which means YouTube is not presenting them to you, the viewer. Some examples are Noam Chomsky's interview about Europe's decline, the interview with the Swiss historian Dr. Daniele Ganser, the amazingly candid discussion with the US Ambassador Charles Freeman, or even the recent interview with the former director of the Max Planck Institute, Wolfgang Streeck. So if you're interested in content that apparently you're not supposed to see, content that goes against the mainstream narrative, have a look at some of the previous interviews that we have recorded for your pleasure. And of course, it really helps to spread the news if you like and subscribe to this channel. Here we go. Erik Andersson, great to have you. How's it going?
Yeah. Well, nice to be here. Thank you.
It was an uncomplicated process, actually also quite a quick process. I sent you, what was it, via Twitter, I believe, yeah? Some messages, and here we are. So thanks for your time.
Well,
yeah. I spent, today is Sunday, yeah? I spent most of the day going through the material that you sent me, yeah? And you also sent me the original, how shall I call it, video collection from the trip you made on the, let's say, original site of the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. Maybe we start there. Yeah, tell us a bit about it. What's your background? Maybe we start with your background. So you're an engineer. So how did you come into this whole area?
Well, I'm an engineer. I started on different things. I did my first company was doing we were doing crew scheduling, or I was a co-founder of that company that did crew scheduling. I was sitting in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, for a couple of or a week. I think I was sitting there implementing system scheduling, the KLM pilots. That was interesting experience. But also the other national airlines and U.S. airlines, and that company became relatively successful. Had a big share of the world market, and we were bought by Boing, the aircraft manufacturer Boeing. So I became a subsidiary of Boeing, and after that, I joined a project to do aircraft performance modeling. The jet propulsion and the aerodynamics and things like that. So that was fun. I got into physics and gas dynamics. So that's been a little bit relevant for the pipelines with the outburst of gas and what that meant. The effect of that, there were enormous forces that acted on the pipeline as they broke, because the gas was pressurized in the Nord Stream 1 case to 165 bars, and that's like a rocket engine, similar to a Falcon rocket.
So to compare this with the car tire, car tire has between 1.8, 2.2 something, yeah.
Yes.
So that's a order of magnitude higher than, yeah.
Yes, and then it was, of course, a very long volume, since this 1,100 kilometers of pipeline, which is completely open. So all that gas had to, escape from the pipeline, and that's an interesting, interesting problem in itself.
It took almost, 2 days to empty the pipelines, right?
Well, I think it took like 8-9 hours for the short end from Germany and up, and then it took like 3 or 4 days for the way up to Russia, which is much longer. It's like, I don't remember exactly, but it's 8 times or 10 times longer. So that took much more time.
Yeah, but let's finish your involvement here. So we have your credentials as an engineer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get involved with Nord Stream, with the whole topic?
Well, I was also interested in policy. I mean, I was a retired engineer. I sold my company to Boeing, and then I left Boeing when they decided to do some outsourcing. It was an opportunity for me to leave, and so I retired. So I had time on my hands, and what we can do these days is follow the news and follow what happened on Twitter, and then there are lots of stories, lots of cover-ups and government doing weird things. And now something happened in my neighborhood in Sweden that looked really strange to me. I mean, we were aware of the surveillance in the Baltics, and then I started to see how the Swedes were behaving. They're going there and made a big grab, closed off the area, and said they had jurisdiction to do an investigation and take up all the evidence, although they didn't have any jurisdiction. So all this sounded like very intriguing, and I thought I was well placed to take this on, and I was contacted by some journalists, and I ended up doing this expedition because I felt there was very little information just being recycled all the time, and some very basic questions were not being answered. I mean, basic forensic questions like what was the size of the bombs, how were the bombs placed, how many bombs were there, what type of explosives. These type of basic questions, we didn't get answers to them, although, I mean, the information was there. Several ships had been going there, and they had been doing sonar maps, but nothing was released. So I thought, I could do it.
Great. Absolutely. Someone needs to do it because nobody else did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to put this a little bit in context. Yeah. So I think by all measurements, what happened there is one of the largest ecological disasters that happened in a long time. The methane that escaped, and I know in relative terms, it's not as big. Yeah. Compared to what the world is using, yeah. But for a single incident, what happened there, the escaped methane is quite massive, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was 500,000 tons of methane, and when you report to the IPCC, I mean, you have to report the global warming potential. You have to multiply that by a factor of 28 because it's considered a very very potent greenhouse gas. So when Sweden and Denmark had to report, they found they almost increased the emissions by 50%. So it was like more than all the cars for a year in Sweden.
Yeah.
But then eventually, I think they are coming to the conclusions that they don't have jurisdiction now, so they're not going to report.
We're gonna come on the topic of jurisdiction because I think it's an important topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, the incident itself, yeah, and the consequences not only for Germany but for Europe are massive. Yeah. I would like to.
Absolutely.
I would like to state, I have not only, there's a video that I already have specifically in regards to Nord Stream, yeah, but I have spoken about this topic with a whole host of people, yeah, starting with Noam Chomsky, Professor Jeffrey Sachs from the Columbia University, Roy McGovern, a 20-year-old a CIA analyst of 28 years. I've spoken with the former director of the Max Planck Institute in Germany, most recently, like a week ago, yeah. There are more. Really? There are even more, and all of them. I mean, keeping in mind that the Noam Chomsky interview took place almost a year before Samuel Hersh came out with this story, and the same is true with Jeffrey Sachs. Yeah? And all of them, without exception, point to the USA, if not that as being directly involved, then indirectly. All of them, without exception. Yeah, and knock on wood 3 times. I may have the opportunity to speak to a German general in the not too distant future. Yeah, so I'm very curious to see how that discussion goes when we talk about Nord Stream. Yeah, so if you allow me, I have a couple of notes in regards to statements concerning the Nord Stream pipeline, which we all know the Americans were not happy. Yeah? But just to keep this in everybody's mind, yeah. So of course there was Joe Biden who said, if Russia invades Ukraine, there will be no longer Nord Stream 2. We will bring it to an end. Yeah. And the funny thing is, there was a female reporter in this press conference, and I saw this interview. She was a bit puzzled. Mr. President, how are you going to do that? I mean, this is a Russian-German enterprise. Yeah. And he said literally, I have the notes here, I promise you we will be able to do that. Yeah. So that's right, that's Joe Biden. Yeah. Then, of course, we have US Secretary of State Blinken. Yeah. Nord Stream sabotage is also a tremendous opportunity. I mean, let that sink in. Yeah, something like this happens, an attack of the critical infrastructure of one of the closest allies of the US. And the US says it's a tremendous opportunity, yeah, to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they're not hiding it at all, you know.
It's just incredible. And then we have this arch hawk, Victoria Nuland, which recently has been either sacked or she went on her own. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, she said if Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream will not move forward. An interesting one comes from Senator Ron Johnson, because he almost appears to be calling for the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, because he said we should take actions that will prevent it from ever becoming operational. Yeah, not to mention, and we all saw this picture from the former Polish foreign minister Radek Sikorski with this big picture of Nord Stream. Thank you, USA, which after a couple of hours they removed from.
Did you see the news the other day that he doubled down on that?
Yeah, no, I didn't.
It was in a Polish newspaper. He's back to Poland, in the new government, Donald Tusk government.
Okay.
He's a foreign minister again.
Okay.
And he was interviewed, and he was quoted in Berliner Zeitung. I read the German paper, and he says, the U.S. let it happen. They knew it, and they let it happen. So he was accurate in a way. So it's surprising because he's married to this Anne Applebaum, another famous neocon, and she said he was joking and he was sort of retracting it and blah blah blah. But now he's back online, and I think that's quite interesting because Poland, in the current narrative that's shaping in the U.S. press and also German press, then Poland is playing a role as assisting this mission.
Yeah.
So I think they will feel pretty in a bad space if they, U.S. is throwing Ukraine under the bus. What happens to Poland if the U.S. are washing their hands?
True.
So I don't think Sikorski likes that very much. No. Okay.
I have one last one. Sarah Wagenknecht. At the time she was a German parliamentarian, and she actually asked the German government what the results of the investigation then. This statement is I think a year old. Yeah, she asked the German government what the results of the investigations were, and the answer was the requested information can't be provided due to the third-party rule. Yeah, for international cooperation of intelligence services. They stated that the requested information is so sensitive that in the interest of the state, that the interest of the state supersedes the right of information for the parliament. I mean, imagine this. Yeah, not even the parliament. The information
that's a very creative trick they have there.
Yeah.
It's similar to what Sweden is saying for keeping everything confidential from the investigation. I mean, they're saying they have cooperation with the Germans. So they just have to, join a gang of some others and then share it and prevent it from anybody else because of their internal agreement. It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Now let's consider for 1 second that the Russians did it. Like 5 minutes after those attacks, the whole Western media, I have to say, Western, which we think it's the whole world. No, it's 16% of the world population. So our little bubble, where they make us believe everybody thinks like we think. No, we are 16% of the world. So the Western media said it was the Russians. Yeah. So let's say that it would have been the Russians. All of this wouldn't make sense. They would broadcast it was the Russians on every single channel possible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's quite obvious. You have these thing. You look at the behavior and you see fingerprints everywhere, and in so many places. They wouldn't have done this if it were Russia. So. I think that also makes a lot of people think that it's not holding up. The narrative isn't credible at all anymore. So they're even saying it wasn't Russia. Even the Swedish investigator ended up saying that he never thought it was Russia. So I think they more or less gave that up. But in the beginning, it was very a very coherent media strategy to blame Russia, and they were presenting theories that Russia were the only ones that had a motive and all these things.
That reminds me on the terror attack in Moscow that happened 2 days ago, right? Where the Western media, almost immediately, it was ISIS. Yeah. Immediately, they concerted. In which country you watch the news? Everywhere it was ISIS. It was ISIS. Today on the Dutch news, I heard they modified it a little bit. They said they said ISIS claimed it and they caught the 4 perpetrators. Yeah, omitting the fact that the 4 perpetrators were fleeing in direction Ukraine. Yeah, they just caught them in front of the border. Yeah,
that will be an interesting one to follow, because now that they caught these 4 guys, so they're probably it's going to come some more information.
Yeah, one kind of lost his ear, and they're selling now the knife that was used to cut off the ear on an auction in Russia. So that's also a way of executing a investigation, right? Anyway, different world. Yeah. Coming back to the Nord Stream, and I would really like to highlight your activities there a little bit. Yeah. How does a thing like this work? I mean, this is really incredible. Yeah, where the whole global media failed. I think you even offered the global media to participate in your little expedition. Yeah, you take a boat. Yeah, you go to the site. I mean, basic question. Yeah, how on earth did you find the site? Is that known, or I mean, the coordinates, or how?
Well, it's actually they're marked on the sea chart, but then there is also applications where you can follow other ships by their the so-called AIS messages. There's one application called Marine Traffic where you can follow ship traffic. Many people use it just to track shipments from
unless they switch it off on the boats.
Unless the switch is off, but for instance, the Swedish dive ship Belos, it's a big submarine rescue ship, pride of the Swedish Navy. It has all these nice systems of dynamic positioning. It can stay exactly right over the site, and it has a bay where it can send down the divers. That was positioning itself exactly over the different spots, in the middle. So I could, I could go back in the history of marine traffic and see where it was. And that was actually, it turned out to be accurate to just a few meters.
Incredible. Yeah. Okay. So you track the location down, and then how do I have to see this? I mean, I will, with your permission, I have not asked you yet, but with your permission, I will take some of those clips that you sent me.
Of course, you can do
the clips in the editing.
And if you read the Substack, we also took sonar images. I mean, the so-called side scan sonar images, and also a depth profile sonar imaging. So again, from that, there's a very strong analyst in Berlin, Michael Cobbs, who turned that into 3-dimensional models.
Yes, I saw it. You sent me the link. I saw it. I will also use it.
That's very good if you show that.
Yeah.
So we were mapping. That was one of the things we were doing. We were mapping the area, and that allowed us to figure out what was actually going on with the physics.
Meaning, you had your own sonar device, I believe, which you called the fish, right?
Yeah, they call it the fish. I mean, these guys were really excellent. They are professionals. They are working on finding stray fishing nets. They're fishermen losing their nets, and they are like death traps for fish, so that they get paid, I think, from various environmental organizations to go and pick these nets up. But they could actually see the fishing lines and the nets. So it's a very high resolution sonar imaging that's going on. And you have to drag that close to the bottom. You have to get down to the lower layer because the Baltic Sea is stratified. It's actually more of a lake than the ocean. The only reason there is salt is because of the winds, the storms in the North Sea that are bringing in salt water, and that sinks to the bottom. So the bottom water is salty, and rather warm, actually, like 10, 12 degrees warm, which is warm for being bottom water. And then the surface water is pretty, sweet. But then because of this difference, the sonar, the sound waves are diffracted, like in a lens, and getting curved. So there's all this science about how to figure out how much they're diffracted and compensate for that and get good images. and the submarine hunters are, they have to do a lot of math to figure out what they hear, because they hear it from one direction and it's actually in a different position. But it's a well-known problem, and if you work there, you have to have equipment that can handle it.
Yeah. Talking about equipment, so if we briefly talk, so the site, the underwater site, is about 80 meters underwater, right?
Yes.
Between 70 and 80 meters.
Yes.
Yeah? Now, I'm a diver, a recreational diver, and I can tell you, I know a thing or two about decompression time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, whoever was down there, for every 5 minutes, they are down there actually working, they need to add quite a significant amount of time decompressing. That means they cannot just go straight up, right?
No.
So then there were multiple sites, there were multiple explosives used. I would like us not to forget what you said in another interview, that you think the Americans actually came back and picked up the explosive, which obviously have not exploded. Yeah, let's not forget that. Yeah, so you had to have.
Well, I took that back. I wasn't. It was the main theory before going on the expedition. But then, when we have analyzed the footage, I don't believe anymore that there were 8 bombs. I mean, Seymour Hersh said at one point to Berliner Zeitung, he said that there were 8 bombs, and only 6 of them exploded. But there is nothing to support that, really. And what we've found is that they were what seems to be mistakenly placed 2 bombs on the same line. And that means that there were exactly 4 bombs. And the intention was definitely to blow up all of the 4 lines. But I think there were just four bombs, and all 4 of them exploded. So I don't know about this. There were American ships speeding back to the site. I mean, he was right about that. I mean, they were hiding, and we know now that there were American warships from just as early as the Swedes were there. Americans were there. So that's bizarre that they were present. But I'm not sure about unexploded bombs. Of course, I can't know. Maybe there were unexploded bombs. I mean, that would be terrible. Yeah.
So I'm just referring to this, let's say, alternative theory, because they came up after Cy Hersh's story came out.
Yeah.
Then we have this counter story with this sailboat. We know that this trip actually took place. But before we go there, I just wanted to say, so it's not as easy as that. You cannot just dive down there, do your work, and then come up. Yeah. So this has to be planned by professionals. They have to know how to calculate this. You have to have the equipment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's not only about diving. You have to have the expertise to handle the explosives. So I heard, and I apologize, I have seen so many interviews now in preparation for this interview. I heard someone say, on the whole planet, you have about 300 people who can do that, 300 specialists who can do that. Yeah. So the pool from which to, according to that information, I don't know how correct it is, yeah, but the pool of people that you have, and they're all from military, yeah, and also the
No,
also
I mean that's not true that they're all from military, because I this is another reason I did get involved, is that I happen to know a neighbor of mine who is a sort of semi-professional diver with civilian equipment, and he dives regularly to 100 meters and sometimes more. He's been going to 120 meters.
Okay, but that's the diving part. But then you have to have, at the same time, the divers have to have the expertise to handle these explosives correctly, right? And this was apparently military-grade explosive, yeah? HMC, Octagon.
Yeah, but maybe it was prepared into, pre-manufactured into something looking like a sea mine that was shaped to fit the job. So obviously you try to do as much as possible above the water.
You mean on the kitchen table of the sailboat, right?
Well, you could even get it to you before you go on the boat.
Yeah, but
it's just sort of weird that they would slip any oxygen on the kitchen table. I don't know why they would do that, because I would think it would be packaged into a bomb, and then all they had to do is to sort of diffuse it or
For
something when they get down there.
for viewers who don't know this story, yeah, the official narrative, this is not a joke. I mean, we are laughing about this, yeah, but this is not a joke. The official narrative is that they found traces of this explosive on the kitchen table of this yard. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's how
some
they're
on the
mentioning this.
toilet too. I think on the toilet. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a serious streak to that, yeah. But I agree. This could be pre-prepared, which even further limits, the potential suspects. I mean, who pre-prepares a underwater sea mine, yeah, to then be delivered to some people who can dive that far, right?
Yeah, of course, it's a sign that there is a bigger organization behind this with large resources. Even if it was on a sailboat, there were some resources to make it all work, and also to have them give them cover in some way, so that they didn't get caught.
And we can talk about the sail yacht Andromeda a little bit later. Yeah? I'm not following my script here. I'm going crisscross, so I'm going in from the back now. Yeah, but just before, like half an hour before the interview, you sent me what you posted on Twitter in regards to the lawsuit, right? Incidentally, I actually have a different copy of this lawsuit, and the one thing, I mean, you will talk about this in a moment, yeah. But the one thing that stuck out for me, because it says that the Nord Stream lawsuit also says that one of the pipelines looked mangled and deformed in one area, but appeared smooth and have to be cut in another. So apparently there were at least, I mean, it could be that the Swedes then, collecting evidence, cut parts. Yeah, but what's your view? That one part is like mangled and deformed, as we see on your film, and then others appear clean cut.
Well, we know for a fact that the Swedes have been cutting off parts of the pipeline.
50 meter, right?
50 meters and
not small bits and pieces, right? It was 50 meter.
Well, maybe they're also taking some small pieces. I don't know, but they've been. I mean, they took 2 containers of artifacts from the site, so they have been collecting a lot of stuff, and that was of course gone when we got there. I think. I don't know. The Nord Stream have done a more thorough investigation of the area than I've done. I mean, they have more advanced, expensive drones, and they photographed everything, and they spent a lot of time there. So they
You mean the company? You mean the company? Nord
well,
Stream?
the company have contracted offshore surveillance companies who have been doing this, survey companies. So they have an idea of what the situation is, what it looks like. And I've been talking to Nord Stream too about it, and we have the same, we've seen the same things, but they've seen more. So I think that what they described there in the lawsuit is correct, of course, and they could have seen maybe some of those cut surfaces. I didn't see any cut surfaces. I saw clean surfaces, but they were all consistent with the metal being broken off, and that's. I mean, there are these different ways for metal to break. There are ductile breaks and brittle breaks. Like it could break like glass if it just violently bends very quickly, and it's even cooled down by the expansion of the gas, and the temperature goes down. So like it was like minus 40 degrees Celsius when the gas exited.
You
So
mean because the gas itself is so cold that it cools the metal?
yes, it cools the metal. And then there's the concrete outside of the, it's covered by 10 centimeters of concrete, and it created some sort of effect where it looks like it's cut off, but it's actually just because it's been bent. And when you see that it's ovalized, they talked about it also in the in this insurance report that it was ovalized. And that's if you have a cylindrical tube and you bend it, it will become oval in the bend before, breaking. So I think this ovalization is a sign that it was a result of bending rather than many different explosives or metal cutting.
To give the listener an impression of the force underwater, how big are those craters that you measured with your sonar?
Well, the cavities that the what you call craters and what's been reported on are they're about 10 to 12 meters deep, and maybe the diameter of 20, 30 meters. But there are several, like 5 craters in a row. So it's the on Nord Stream 1, which was a really high pressure pipeline, it's 280 meters in one place and 250 meters in another place, but it's 280 meters between the open end on the Russian side and the open end on the German side. So all those 280 meters of pipeline has been, torn apart and thrown away into pieces. So you can see these pieces, which are, one of them it weighs 96 tons. It's 48 meters long. It weighs is like V-shaped, and it's been ejected more than 50 meters away from its original position.
Massive forces, yeah.
Yeah.
But the question is, I mean, this was probably not done by the explosion itself, but by the gas
Yeah.
that came out of it, right?
Yeah.
So again, massive forces. But you just said 5 craters. I thought we have 4 explosions.
No, but this is like the sequence in each one of those. I mean, in Nord Stream 1 is one pattern. You have two, line A and line B of Nord Stream 1, and there are, like, maybe you can have a figure on this because I have pictures of it on my Substack. But I think where the original bomb exploded, there is a small crater, and then the pipeline like went up like this and was cut again here and here. So in 2 more. So then you have 3 craters, and then those pieces went up, and then you have the 4 and 5, and those are 280 meters apart. But you can see that when you do the 3-dimensional mapping of the seafloor, you can see this line of 5 craters. But the crater in the end is the biggest one, and of the 2 end craters, the one on the Russian side is much bigger than the one on the Danish side, because that was not created by an explosion. That was created by the plume of water or water with tiny bubbles, and the bubble water is lighter than the surrounding water, so that rises. And that's a very powerful plume, like a chimney. We have the light air going out of the chimney, and this chimney effect was very powerful here, so that that induces a water current. We know that it threw the water up like 60 meters in the air, because there was a German captain who actually saw it and took a photograph. And when they came, like even 11 hours later, you could see it bursting up to like 10 or 20 meters. And there was a Danish helicopter flying, what was it, 5 hours after, and could see it maybe 30 meters up. So you this phenomenon of the plume shooting up like a geyser, is a similar effect, like a geyser was shooting up the water in the air. That corresponds to very, very strong water currents at the bottom, and those currents are carving out these big holes that are called craters. It's not from the bomb, because there was one pipeline that was not very pressurized when the bomb went off, and there is no significant bomb crater at all.
There was one pipe that was attacked, but which did not burst, right? I saw on your films, it's damaged from the side, right?
Well, there's a little hole there. Yeah,
Is there a little hole?
Yeah,
Okay.
there was a leak, but it was a small leak.
Yeah. And the assumption is it didn't explode because the pressure was already lower because of the previous explosions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it had been depressurizing for 17 hours already.
Yeah.
So that,
So
yeah.
yeah. So just for the sequence, and again, I know I'm jumping around, yeah, but for me this is also very new. I spent today. I have a lot of notes here, but I would like to cover quite some stuff. So we had on the 26th of September 2022, we had the first explosion at 2 o'clock and 3 minutes in the morning,
Yes.
right? And then we had the second, well, explosions plural, yeah, at 3 minutes past 7, twice 3 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
Well, you can have different theories. Of course, I think that the main my main hypothesis about this is that they weren't able to finish. I mean, you mentioned you have to go up and down. You have to spend a lot of time of decompression when you're diving, and if they did three. They rigged 3 bombs in the northern site. They could very well have run out of time and not be able to place the 4th one. Then they went back to Poland, and it's a very interesting stop that they made in Poland, in Kolberg.
Who made the stop?
The Andromeda boat.
The sailboat.
The sailboat. Okay.
Okay.
Now, of course, maybe this is a cover story, and then it will complicate things. But in the context, if we believe for a second that the Andromeda was the real thing, then I think they were running out of time. They could only rig 3 out of 4, but on the way back from Kolberg to Wiek in Germany, they passed by the southern side, the last site, and they placed the bomb there on the wrong pipeline because they had been confused by the magnetic field that behaved very strangely in the northern side. So they didn't know which one they had planted. They planted the wrong one. But I think that's how they ended, because I don't think there was no rational reason to do 2 sides. I mean, they had access to all the 4 lines in the northern side, and the northern side is the best one from all perspectives. It's far away, you can't see land there. It's almost out of radar range, and I mean, the cell phones, you can't track them. But you can track them on the southern side. You can actually see Bornholm from that side. You could use your cell phone there, I noticed, and it's a lot of traffic going there, a lot more sea traffic. So it's a bad place actually to do something in the southern side. So I think the plan, if they had a reasonable plan, it would be to put all 4 bombs on the northern side, and something went wrong. So they probably had to patch it up with another trip in the end.
So since we are talking about this now, yeah, it's actually a question that I should ask at the end, yeah. But it seems to me that you think the Andromeda version of events is the credible one.
Well, I mean, as I said, it definitely happened. I mean, it went to 5 different ports. There are witnesses in the ports, and they were behaved very suspiciously.
The boat trip happened, no question about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it was the real thing or not, it was organized by the perpetrators. It's either, I mean, it wasn't a pleasure trip. I mean, you don't rent a sailboat and go for engine in like lousy weather and out of season with 6 crew without using sails. I mean, why do you use a sailboat and you're not sailing? And then going to Sweden and paying cash is very unusual. I mean, we always use credit cards over here. Why would they use cash? Why would they forge the passports? it's something that, of course, these guys who were involved are very, very murky. So I can understand why the German journalists are buying the story. If the intelligence organizations have arranged this to totally fool those journalists, then they've been doing a pretty good job, I think.
The one observation that I would make would be, if this is a intelligence operations, then exactly the behavior that you described. I mean, there's more. Huh? They were quite obvious, unconspicuous. Yeah. No, how shall I say this better? They simply behaved suspicious.
Yeah,
I would expect from an intelligence operation to avoid anything to raise suspicions, and this is not what they did. They acted contrary.
Yeah. So
it almost looks like they wanted to be.
I think you're right. I mean, if you look at the map, this Polish port where they went is very close. It's just a few hours by engine away from that Polish port. So why would they go to Germany for a whole day? And why would they risk taking explosives into Germany, of all places, when it's not needed? It's logistically, it's just a detour. And they could have. I actually checked. You could have rented a similar boat in Kolberg in Poland. And in Poland, they even had cover. I mean, they had the police was boarding the boat in Poland, and they are obviously protecting them. They're turning off the surveillance cameras, or they're keeping the surveillance footage, and they're not giving it to the Germans. That's what you can read in the German newspapers. So, yeah, I mean, it looks like they did some things only to deceive.
I did not catch this. So, what, if I understood you correctly, the Polish police actually boarded this yacht with those 6 suspicious gentlemen, and there was a woman involved.
Yeah,
too?
and Polish officials are saying that this is definitely just a pleasure trip, so they're defending it, and they are. But the same people are also blaming the Russians, so it's not really.
Understand.
But what the point? I'm talking to these German journalists now, and they tell me they still haven't the German investigation does not get the information from the Polish. Still, that's what I hear. So obviously there is something going on there.
Yeah. So if you talk about the investigation, so. Sweden and Denmark just a week ago or so stopped their investigations, right?
Yes.
Now, coincidence or not, I mean, we all know that Sweden and Finland have or will. Sweden already is part of NATO now, right?
Finland, we officially joined NATO. It's very sad.
It's a total different story, but it's also risky. I think it's risky, but again, it's a different story. So, is there any relation, do you think, for this investigation to be shut down, in addition of any findings being classified, and Sweden joining NATO?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the connection. I mean, I think Sweden has secretly cooperated with the American military for a long, long time. And I mean, it was brought up on another podcast, on the Gray Zone podcast with Max Blumenthal. He brought it up, but I know for a fact that in the old days when Sweden had the neutral policy,
aggressive neutrality. That's how Kissinger called it.
Yeah, like it was seen as something aggressive, that we were neutral, something that had to be stopped. Maybe like in a similar way that they were stopping Imran Khan in Pakistan now, and that some other leaders in some other countries have been stopped. I mean, there was a situation in the 80s where Olof Palme was the prime minister of Sweden, and he was very openly supportive of many insurgencies against the United States in South America and the Middle East and so on. And he had to maintain this neutrality um, reputation to have a position internationally. I mean, he was negotiating in the Iran-Iraq war and in Palestine and these things, and that was he got some credibility from speaking out against both U.S. and the Soviet Union. And then, as the theory goes among people, some scholars here in Sweden, he was scheduled to meet with Gorbachev. This was perestroika time in 1986. He was scheduled for a meeting with Gorbachev, and there was the aggressive neutrality. Maybe was dangerous because it was like the Swedish model of neutrality could have been a model for a Soviet Union. Maybe going to more of a social democratic system rather than going to the market, uh, you know, uh, of selling out all the state enterprises in a big fire sale and all these things. So I think there is a widespread theory that Olof Palme was murdered for that reason, but I don't actually know. I don't have any evidence of that. But what I think is a fact is that he wanted to keep this uh, perception of being very neutral and very independent, and because of that, the military contacts between Sweden and the U.S. Uh, were somehow accepted to be independent of the civilian government. So I mean, the generals were talking. Maybe the defense minister was talking to generals in America without even informing the prime minister or the parliament, and that's probably been going on since then.
There was a consistent attempts by the US to kind of get Sweden in line. Yeah. When we talk about Olof Palme and there was this incidents with the so-called Russian submarines.
That was that's very interesting because there were opinion polls in Sweden in the late 70s. Only about 20% of the Swedes were thinking of Russia as a threat. And then all of the news, the television news and newspapers were completely dominated for a year of these threats, these Soviet submarine intrusions. And it changed the public opinion so that in the mid 80s, it was, I think, 83% that thought of Russia as a threat. So there was a scare tactic, and it all turned out to be a hoax. There were no Russian submarines. They were American, or they were actually Italian manufactured, but they were NATO submarines that were used to maintain a network of American hydrophones uh, in the waters around Sweden. And
I have an actual note here. 20, so referring to 1982, 20 years later, statements made by the responsible US and UK leaders, including then Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger and the UK Navy Minister Keith Speed, show that these operations were run by the US and the British submarines testing Swedish coastal defenses, exactly like you said. So that was used as a scare tactic. And now this is a good segue into, one second. Sweden needs to prepare for war. So I saw an interview where the military leader, Sweden's call for population to prepare for war sparks panic and criticism. Yeah, let me just very quickly have a look who that was.
Yeah.
So I mean, Gustav Walborn, I don't see now who did say, but it's there. Commander-in-Chief Michael Biden.
Well,
So the populations of multiple European countries are primed for war with Russia. I mean, this is really getting scary.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it is. It's no joke. It's terrible. I mean, you've been in business. I'm in business, going around in the world. I was never a leftist. Actually, I'm not a left winger, but I'm still been proud of Sweden as this egalitarian, peaceful little country, which is free. You can walk anywhere in nature. You have this brand of the country, a tradition, and now they're just throwing it all out of the window and becoming, the all important thing is to defend the West and to
Yeah, it's less to defend the West, because America, in my opinion, doesn't really care much about the West. America cares about American hegemony.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is what they're defending.
Yeah, and we are for some reason submitting to this without any elections,
Discussion. Yeah.
no discussion. It's just happening, and I mean there was not a popular support, or maybe if there is, they can arrange a psyop and do popular support. I mean, I noticed myself because from my expedition, the local television channel here in my town of Gothenburg made a very good report of my expedition, and then he made it for national television. But the editors in national television, they were very suspicious and they never aired it. And I wonder why. And then I was reading, I said that they had this policy to you have to educate the Swedes on who is the enemy, and that's like priority number one. So there always has to be this speech, and they put in millions in a big TV show, a series about Russian spying, and this Nord Stream event was a part of that. And it's all with scary music and all designed to be like the submarine scare, to prepare the public to be afraid of Russia. That's the whole objective of the investment of the Swedish state television. So I think that it just didn't fit in for someone like me just go there and are looking into it. It's showing that's a very naughty thing to do or something.
Just as an example, it's not related to Russia and Ukraine, but just an example of how far states would go to kind of manipulate public opinion. Yeah, I interviewed Professor Nurit Peled El-Hanan in regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and she did research in regards to racism in Israeli school books. Yeah, incredible. That means the Israeli state already indoctrinates children right after the kindergarten, with the school books.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a different situation, it's a different context, everything. Yeah, but states will defend their interests. Yeah, and a good example is the leaks actually that happened in regards to the Nord Stream attacks 3 months before they actually happened. Yeah, there was a little chap called Jack Dijkstera, again a name that I hardly can pronounce. Yeah. But he shared online on Discord. The intelligence reporting was shared online on Discord, purportedly by Air National Guard member Jack, whatever his second name is. And he was arrested in April and charged in relation to the leak of sensitive US documents. Yeah. And that's actually something that the Washington Post already said, because they obtained a copy of his online findings. Yeah.
I think this was like end of March, beginning of April 2023.
Yeah.
So, and what relates to Nord Stream here is an American translation or an American summary of actually a Dutch report, an MIVD report, that it's fishy as hell. But it included a warning about 6 Ukrainian commandos renting a boat in Stockholm. And then, as the story now goes, this was called off, or someone was America, CIA, through some intermediary, was informing General Zaluzhny, then the top general in Ukraine, to that America was opposed to it and thought that was called off. That's how the story goes. I don't know how to interpret this, because the intelligence services are in total control when they are giving you these little bits of information.
So again, and this is another interesting parallel in regards to the terror attack in the Moscow theater 2 days ago, because apparently America also warned, Russia. Yeah. Actually, the only thing I found, officially it said America warned Russia, but what I found were only those emails that were sent to Americans either to get out of Russia or not to join any large events like concerts, etc., etc. Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
it's just a parallel. Yeah. But
Yeah.
you just spoke about the Dutch. Yeah. I'm sitting here in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Mm.
So the Dutch. Okay. So the Dutch own 9% of this enterprise for the Nord Stream pipelines. Yeah. So
Yeah. Nord Stream
Russia
80.
owns.
Yeah.
Yeah, Russia owns 51%, Germany 31%, France 9%, the Dutch 9%. And now we come to this leak that we briefly scratched on. So what's the story here? The Dutch Secret Service
Oh, the Dutch circuit. Yeah, the
leaking.
leak. Yeah.
Why is it called a leak actually? Why?
Yeah, yeah. I thought of a gas leak, so I didn't
No,
know
no,
what
no.
you were
Yeah,
talking about. Okay, it's reported in Germany as not as a leak, but like more of a genuine report of someone being concerned about what was going on in Ukraine. So it's MIVD had a source inside the Ukrainian
Secret
intelligence
Service. Yeah.
secret service. And he was familiar, this source was familiar with the plans to blow up Nord Stream, and reported back to his bosses, and the MIVD in the Netherlands was writing this report that was then cabled to the CIA and also to the Germans. But the funny thing is that, as the story now goes, after the blow, he was interviewed again. And it turns out that the same source in Ukraine was also familiar with the Andromeda boat, the boat that was allegedly actually used for the assault. So he actually said it was rented in Rostock, and it was this lead that was communicated to the German investigation, and which made the German investigation focus on looking for a boat in so both of these things are originated with the Dutch.
And to make this clear, yeah, so this information was quite specific. It was a sailboat, 6 people,
No,
etc.
actually, it he didn't know it was a sailboat, allegedly. So the Germans, they knew it was a boat already, like a week or two after the event. In early October, they knew it was a boat, but they didn't know it was a sailboat, and they couldn't imagine it was a sailboat. So it was not until December or something that they extended the search to sailboats, and then they found it in January.
Because okay, but the leak, let's say, from this American Jack Textera there happened 3 months before, right? So we're not talking about in retrospect. So the embedded person in the Ukrainian Secret Service, he then talked after the explosions, right? But the actual leak, yeah, that the Dutch Secret Service provided to the CIA happened 3 months before the explosions.
Yeah, but there were two events. One that happened in the mid of June in 2022 to the Dutch about the boat in Stockholm,
Mm-hmm.
and then after the event in September 26. The Dutch Secret Service went back to their source in Ukraine and asked if he knew what happened. And he said, yes, the Ukrainians rented a boat in Rostock in September. So I mean, that's how the story goes. And I'm super interested. I mean, if you guys in the Netherlands could tell me something about what kind of relationship do you have, really? Why are you there in Ukraine, and why are you such insiders? Because these things are not supposed. Only very few people are supposed to know about a covert thing like this. How come you knew about it? So I mean, it's what they tell me is after the MH17 crash.
Airplane, yeah.
It's been a lot of contact there between the Dutch and the Ukraine, and it could be some remnants of that that gave you this position. But I mean, it's really hard to interpret this because we don't know the objectives. There are other things pointing to that the Dutch Secret Service are all in the same team as the CIA and the other guys. So it was actually maybe they put out this leak on purpose to divert attention, or maybe now the last time the purpose was to throw Ukraine under the bus because the US was starting to look as too much
Tainted.
involved.
Yeah.
Tainted. So they all twisted the story to sound like it was a rogue Ukrainian operation that they've done completely on their own.
Yeah, incredible, credible. Yeah, I have an article in front of me. It's called "The Spy War: How the CIA Secretly Helps Ukraine Fight Putin." Yeah, and a little paragraph here: the head of the Russian House, the CIA department overseeing the operations against Russia, organized a secret meeting at Den Haag. Yeah, they are representatives from the CIA, Britain's MI6, the HUR, the Dutch Secret Service, and other allies agreed to start pooling together more of their intelligence against Russia. The result was a secret coalition against Russia, and the Ukrainians were vital members of it. Yeah. So clearly, I mean, you only have to watch the news here in the Netherlands. It's clear that they're both on the side of Israel and on the side of the Ukrainians, right? But as we said before already, they have a financial interest in this whole story, right? So the Dutch have more than just a peripheral role in that game. What that role exactly is, hard to say. Yeah. Question is, actually, it's unlikely that Ukraine did the Nord Stream attacks. If we assume it was really Ukrainians who executed the actual act. Yeah, but it's very unlikely that they did it alone.
Yeah, no, that's clear.
Good. Let me have a look. What else I have here? I have actually too many notes here. I'm drowning. Yeah. So we already covered the Swedes stopped their investigation. They have no findings whatsoever. At least they said they have no findings. Right. That's the official. Yeah. Then the Danish did the same. Yeah, the Danish, and I believe also the Swedish, they handed over the investigation to Germany, right? Then the Danish too cited jurisdiction. And coming back, we said this at the very beginning, jurisdiction, yeah? So there were some debates, and again, I'm referring to interviews that I saw this morning that in which you participated, right? So jurisdiction is an issue because actually Sweden did not have jurisdiction, although at the beginning it was globally said it's the Swedes, they should do the investigation. What then happened is the Swedes picked up, cleaned the site from all evidence, which is now classified, and now they're saying we stop because we actually don't have jurisdiction, right? Did I understand this correctly?
Yes, it's a like a bogus after construction. Because I was in contact with some legal scholars who are, really the authorities in this field, and they're saying this is total nonsense. It is international waters. This economic zone has nothing to do with territorial waters. The economic zone is exactly what it says. It's an economic zone. It's a regulation that exists for exactly that, for economic reasons. That if there are natural resources, it regulates who should exploit them and what responsibilities and rights you have to natural resources in the area, and it's very specified to that. So for a case like this to get claim jurisdiction to do a criminal investigation, there is absolutely zero support in international law. So that's a very clear answer from the legal scholars here. Then there is this thing. Of course, it does involve. I mean, the exploitation of gas and oil on your continental shelf. You could exploit your oil reserves, and Denmark is doing some of that on the other side, towards the North Sea. And so they have a little more experience than Sweden, and they are maybe more eager to claim jurisdiction. And I mean, you could sort of twist it to say that for the environmental crime of, you know, the gas pouring out, you can claim that maybe you are the one who should report. It affects you. You get a victim because you have to report it as your pollution. So you can say that you can also find the criminals who made you report so much pollution or something. But the Danish actually went ahead and did that. They reported it to the IPCC as their pollution, and so they claimed, or they interpreted it as they had jurisdiction for that particular purpose. But then other lawyers went in for Sweden and said no, and they read the document differently, and they said Sweden did not report, and now maybe the Danish will follow the Swedish lead and they will not report. So they're able to change their minds and do after constructions.
If we still come back once more to the lawsuit that Russia now has against the insurer of the pipeline, I think it's Lloyd, if I saw this correctly. So
there is it's a whole bunch of insurance companies, and then there are these reinsurances like Munich. Rückversicherung.
They're spreading the risk.
They're spreading the risk. Yeah.
But what do you make of it? I mean, two things that I observed. So this whole pipeline cost, I forgot how many billions. But Russia only sues for 400 million. If I see, let me think this right. Court filings state that the Nord Stream current preliminary estimate of the costs to dewater and stabilize the pipeline to undertake a full repair and replace the lost gas inventory is between 1.2 and 1.35 billion. So why they're only suing for 400 million? For me, that seems almost they're not really interested in the money. They want to have They want to have the lawsuit. They want to have an investigation.
Well, I don't have the complete the contract. I just have the excerpts that are in the court documents, and it seems to me that there are some maximum liabilities for this. Maybe they didn't foresee such a big disaster or something. I don't know. But they do have an estimate of the total cost with 1.3 billion.
Yeah.
And that also is not that much, actually.
If you consider the actual costs, yes.
Because, I mean, again, in comparison to the utility of the pipeline, I mean, the value of the gas that comes out in normal production, it's a small amount. You know, it's just a week or so of the value of gas at consumer prices. So, you know, it would be a piece of cake to repair it. And they're telling me that they can repair it. And Nord Stream 1 has also asked for permission from Swedish authorities. For whatever reason, they need permission, but they have asked and they have gotten permission to go there and repair it. But I guess that's pending this lawsuit right now. But I think it's important to note in all this, when you talking about who to blame and so on, that one of the tubes are still operational. They could get gas if they wanted to. They could buy the gas, and the other three, they could have been repaired by now, if it wasn't because of the sanctions. So, and the sanctions are obviously the U.S. So now, in light of the insurance suit, it shows us that the cost is only 1.3 billion for something that's worth hundreds of billions in terms of sort of the total economic impact in Germany. Then, you know, why it's kind of obvious that the one instigating this is really the United States.
And let's not forget the situation. The geopolitical situation has changed. Russia, since this happened, Russia has signed a 50-year contract with China. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Russia is redirecting its energy streams. Yeah. So what strikes me with this whole story, I can only see it as that, again, we said already, hegemony. Yeah? The US is sacrificing Europe on the altar of US hegemony. Yeah? This goes so against German and European interests. Yeah, several people independently, I said already, I spoke, they use the same word, deindustrialization, Germany's
Yes. Yeah.
deindustrialization. So I think people do not realize what this means. The impact will be felt for generations. And I said already, Russia has now a 50-year contract with China. This is not something you flip a switch and you come back like it was before. Yeah,
No, no.
this has a massive impact.
Yeah. No, it's very big in terms of economic impact. It's really big because it's so much. I was amazed and I calculated how much energy it was. I mean, it's 1,100 terawatt hours of energy.
Can you
I mean
translate
that.
this? Can you translate this for someone who has
Well, the
no clue?
total electricity consumption in Germany is 600 terawatt hours for a year. So it's it corresponds to the power output if you would turn that gas into electricity. To compare apples and apples, it would correspond to 73 nuclear plants of average size, gigawatts. It was just one of the four pipes is more energy than all of the green energy in Germany, all of the windmills and solar power and everything. So it's an enormous amount of energy.
Yeah, and this is only one action that drives Russia closer to China. Again, I had another of other interviews with subject matter experts. Yeah, but apparently, America is very short-sighted. Yeah, they're weaponizing their money. Yeah, SWIFT, etc. They kicked Russia of
Yeah,
SWIFT. Now these type of things, so they're virtually driving, Russia and China together. But we know, of course, already from the first NATO General Secretary, Lord Ismay, yeah, he wrote that the aim of NATO is to keep Russia out, Germany down, and America in. Yeah, and there is a, you can find it on the internet. It says Lord Ismay restated. You can find a
No,
whole
no,
string, yeah,
I've
of
heard that quote many times. Yeah.
similar statements. Yeah,
No, but just to me, it looks outright stupid to
yeah.
weaponize the financial system. I mean, the business people, and it's amazing that businesses are not fighting back against this. That so many sort of boards and managements of big companies are not speaking out against it. They are so
Not publicly.
subservient.
Not publicly. Yeah.
No, but that's also strange. I think the banks. If they go, America is stealing the currency, the reserves of Russia. They were just
Like they did with Afghanistan. Yeah.
yeah, like with Afghanistan. They even took the bank accounts of
Yeah.
regular people. They
Yeah.
were confiscating.
Yeah.
So this type of action, behaving like bandits, is not a good thing if you want to be the the hegemon. Of course,
Yeah.
people will try to change the world order. But I was
Breaks.
thinking now in
Yeah.
terms of the insurance company, if insurance is not, if the policy is not awarded according to contract, it's similar to this bank weaponization.
It's going to
So
be a political decision. Yeah, it's going to be a political decision. I have actually your Twitter feed open, and I should say to anyone, you're on Twitter, you're under ERK. I'm gonna put a link in the description. Yeah, but under your name, Erik Andersson or ERK Perk. Why I
yeah,
don't know. Yeah, you're on Twitter,
yeah,
and I have a question for you because probably I didn't have time enough to really read into it. Yeah, but knowing from the past, war events, terrorist attacks are usually 9/11, of course, excluded. Yeah, are usually excluded from insurance covers. Yeah, but then you say a little bit lower. I mean, you basically state, the detonation of an explosion, any weapons of war, blah blah, are excluded. But then you say a couple of one lower that Nord Stream actually has a good case. Help me to
yeah. There
understand.
is a section. I mean, there is an exception to you know detonation of bombs and acts of terror and acts of war. But then there is another section of the insurance policy that covers exactly that exception. So they have some extra policy that is supposed to cover these acts of terrorism or war. and that's quite interesting. So you can read that they are thinking, Nord Stream 2 are thinking that they are entitled to be compensated for this.
Okay. We will follow this with interest. Yeah, I fear this will be a political decision.
Well, but I also talked to this legal scholar, Said Mahmoudi, and he said when this goes to a civil court in this case, there are courts handling this type of corporate matters it's in the UK, and they usually don't feel that they are under political pressure, so it would be something very unusual, if not even unprecedented, because it's not their normal job. I mean, they're supposed to interpret the law, and they have to look at the contract and the evidence and make a decision.
Yeah.
But it's something different that strikes me, and maybe out of the scope here because I didn't hear anybody else saying it. But it surprises me how casually these professors talk about the political interference. They're like talking about this is the international law, and the job of the legal professionals is to make sure that the law is applied correctly in the decisions of the court, etc., etc. But if there's political interference, it's like everything just moves to a different domain, and then they're not commenting on it anymore. And what strikes me is that they're not fighting back. They're not saying, "Oh, Sweden, went with military ships and broke international law, and they took all the evidence, and we should find a way to make them pay for this." The legal scholars are doing nothing to say, "Oh no, it's in the political domain, so it's not our job anymore." So it's like very easy to make these power grabs for for the military and the politicians, and make the international law invalid.
I, again, knock on wood, next Saturday I have scheduled an interview with Emeritus Professor Michael Brenner. He is teaching international relations on the topic of the Russian-Ukraine war, but also specifically in regards to the Ukraine, the Nord Stream attack. Yeah, I'm looking already forward to hear what he has to say on the topic. Yeah,
Yeah,
on the legal side. Yeah, Erik, did we now? One thing before I forget, yeah. I had spoke to a couple of academics, world-renowned academics who lost their jobs for speaking out in various countries. Now, you can't be fired. You sold your company, yeah. People can't really grab you in that angle, from that angle, yeah.
No.
Is there any blowback for you doing this and for you speaking out? Because I saw quite a number. I was surprised how many interviews you gave, which is a good sign, means there's an interest. Yeah. And some of those interviews are really seen by a lot of people. Yeah. So, but with this exposure, the higher the exposure, the higher the risk that there's some blowback. Yeah. Well, did you experience any so far?
Actually, not personally. Other than that, I have friends, of course, who feel that I'm a bit dangerous because they have jobs and they worry about their own, talking to me. But I find it ridiculous because they really don't have any reason to. They're so overly scared for some reason. I don't know why regular people are overly scared. I mean, they're thinking that, like me going to Nord Stream, how could you do that? They're saying, why that's not allowed. So they're assuming it's not allowed. And I think this is part of this manipulation of the public. They're made think that this is something you shouldn't do, but it's never written in the law. This is anybody's entitled to go there, and if officials are asked, they're saying you can go there. So it's not a problem. But I think it's a problem that there are these sort of extra out of curriculum actions, or what to call them, that can be done, like firing people, or for big corporations not awarding permissions, censoring, all kinds of these little tiny penalties that can be applied if you do things which are politically not the right thing to do. And that's why I noticed that very much when planning the expedition, because my first choice was to use a company who had a very advanced research vessel, and they were doing mining exploration, rare earth metals, the stuff that you need for batteries, that are they're precious minerals on the Baltic Sea. And they had this ship, and they're very competent crew. I know one of the guys. It was very interesting to talk to, a pro diver who had participated in building Nord Stream, and he knew a whole lot of things. I wanted him to help me, and he wanted to help me, but then they realized they were in the permit process. They need to get permit from the government to do the mining exploration. So it's probably dangerous to do this, and that's a big problem, that you are, have all these little strings to pull and exert power over people.
What about environmental organizations? Should they not be all over this case? Like Greenpeace?
Yeah, I think so, but that's also something that seems to be infiltrated. Even if the Greenpeace, originally, they went to the Rainbow Warrior. They went to the sort of protesting against nuclear weapons and things, and now it seems to be like just like any activist organization, and they were actually visiting the sites in end of November with their sailboat. They put up their little flag there, and something happened in that. Something very interesting happened. So I've been in contact with them. There was a big offshore ship at the site at the time, who just, a big Norwegian offshore vessel, huge ship that can take 100 crew, and was, going to all four sides. It stayed there longer than the Swedes. The biggest investigation. It was called Norman Frontier, this boat. And that boat was there at the same time as Greenpeace. And when Greenpeace came close, there was an American Coast Guard vessel, the USGS Hamilton, that pushed them away. So
on the Baltic Sea?
On the Baltic Sea, by the explosion site, the American warship was protecting the Norwegian offshore ship that made surveys or diving operations. I've been contacting them because I think that I found a boot by one of the places, and I think that came from the. But the thing is that because of this, I have contacted Greenpeace. We have exchanged films, but something happened with Greenpeace. Although they were very upset about being pushed away by Americans, they're now not commenting. Nobody's allowed to comment on it, and they're not answering messages anymore. I know this journalist, Max Blumenthal, also tried to contact them. They didn't get any information. So something is going on there. There's something came from the top saying that, no, we're not looking into this anymore. So it's just simply not an organic movement. If it was just activists going by their own guts, they would have continued. They had lots of leads to go on, and this incident where they were pushed away by an American warship was something that definitely would have been
incredible,
like a big thing if it had happened like 30 years ago. But not anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned the boot, and I thank you. I have proof. Yeah, I have it here on my notes. Yeah. tell us the story. I will put the actual video clip in the editing. Yeah, but please tell us.
Well, it's something that the professional divers use. They're called overboots. They have warm water suits or dry suits when they do actual work on the water or below on the seafloor. They're heavy boots with the weights in them, like 4 kilos of weights, and the divers don't like them, but they have to, by regulations, they have to use these boots because otherwise they can puncture their suits. If they step on a sharp object, you puncture the suit. You have to go up again, and it's a problem. So they have the boots and they have the weights, so they can walk on the, instead of having fins, they would have boots to walk on the seafloor, but they can fall off and they don't feel them because they have all this big suit under. So they they use duct tape. They duct tape to strap them on the legs, and you can see that there is one of these boots, over boots, on the seafloor right by this misfired bomb. The bomb on the depressurized airlines. It's a pretty pristine site that nobody else went to. I mean, the other journalists, they didn't want to go there because it's actually revealing. But yeah, I was sort of intrigued by the boat. People were saying the boot. I mean, they're saying maybe there is DNA on the tape because you have to take your gloves off to put on the tape, and it's interesting. But then I called Nord Stream too, and they said, okay, yeah, we also saw the boot because I was there in May and they had been there in February, and the boot was already there in February. And they said, I mean, they were very nice. They reported it to the investigation, but they heard nothing back from the investigation. And obviously, the investigation didn't do anything because the boot was still there 3 months later.
Were you not tempted to pick it up?
Well, I couldn't. I just had this little drone thing. I can put there's something called a claw you can put on the drone, but it's too small because this is 4 kilos of weights to keep the boot down, and it was too heavy for me to pick up with that thing. But I actually pitched it to the German television. They could, we should do another expedition and look for the gaps, the things we now know are very interested to look at. But I didn't want to pay for another expedition. It was like 15,000 euros to do it again, and I bought the equipment. I had that already, but we would have other equipment, so it's maybe 20,000 euros.
Crowdsourcing. Yeah. I'm sure there are plenty of people interested.
Yeah, we can do it again. I mean, now it's getting summer, and we can go and see. Maybe the boot is still there. We can go and pick it up. Yeah.
Even to see if it's still there after you published it. Yeah, would be interesting to see if someone snatched it already.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there are other things we'd like to. I'm curious to look at.
Like
the other.
Like.
Well, the southern side, the one that blew up first, is very interesting. It seems like they have removed very little of the pipe there, just maybe 2 meters, but the key place is buried under the mud. So what you would be good to suck away the mud and to verify that the exact placement of the bomb, because there are different theories. The Danish newspapers and RTL and some other TV companies went there, and they had some weird theory about a different type of explosive that they figured because of a different shape. I disagree with that theory, and to find proof for my theory and the Michael Cobb's theory, we would have to take some more photos of the actual place where we think that the bomb was originally placed.
Erik, is there anything that we didn't cover? Anything noteworthy that we overlooked in our conversation?
Oh, there probably was, but I think we covered a lot. Yeah, so I think we should be happy. We can't say everything, It's gonna
yes. No, it was a great conversation, fascinating. I mean, this is not over. Yeah, on both ends.
Yeah.
For both, for the people who want to cover this and for the people who want to discover this is not over.
No.
This story will continue.
Yeah.
Okay. And so will you, right?
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to follow this, and now if I'm allowed to go on these shows, of course I'm motivated to do what I can do. And
Great.
I mean, it's good you brought up. I mean, we should. I know I talked to the captain of the boat. I mean, he's eager to go out again. So if you gather a team who wants to come with us, and we can crowdsource this, of course. I mean, we should. It was beautiful. It was a nice trip to do.
Yeah.
So
I saw things that I didn't want to see. Like I know for a fact now that you are seasick, and I know from past experience I don't have water legs too. So
well, it's okay. You throw up and then you were okay afterwards.
Okay, but the trip was 2 days. 2 days, right?
Yeah, we were away like maybe a little bit more, like 60 hours or something. So
Okay.
we've spent 3 nights, 2
Okay.
days and 3 nights.
And
So
no hostile other American warships encountered this time.
no, we saw a Swedish warship, we saw a Russian ship, but we didn't see anything
Okay. Good.
else.
Good. Erik, again, thank you very much for your time. Again, incredibly uncomplicated process. Yeah, I will leave a link in the description to your Twitter account, right? So
Yeah,
people can reach out to you, right? I can say you were
great.
very forthcoming with all kinds of documentations. I haven't even scratched the surface from all the material that you sent me, but I will. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the
Good.
findings are all there. Okay, thank you very much. Good
Thank
talking to
you.
you. All right.
Likewise. Likewise.